Hi everybody, this is Payana and welcome to my channel, and in this video I'm going to be tackling the Wardstone Chronicles by Joseph Delaney, or all of this massive stack right here. So I've been wanting to do a video about this basically since I started this channel, only I didn't really know how to go about it because it is an insanely long series. I don't actually know how long it is right now. I have 14 books in this series. I haven't read number 14 yet, so we don't need to bother with that one. There's also 2 books that complete the series, The Bestiary and The Witches, so more. So I'll be just giving my general overview of this series, bearing in mind that I started reading it about 13 years ago, so apologies if my memories might be a bit vague about certain issues. I'll try and keep it as concise as possible. It's also known as the Spook series, I think, and it's a series aimed at young teenagers, probably 12 to 14 years old, I would guess. So in the first book, we are introduced to Tom Ward, who is the 7th son of a 7th son, and he is handed over by his mother to go and work, to be an apprentice with the local spook. So the spook's job is to contain witches and goblins and boggarts and other creatures, like magical creatures who might be wreaking havoc in human society. And his job is to fight them and keep their forces at bay. And the people who do this job are always 7th sons of 7th sons, because they have like special abilities and are better suited for doing this kind of work. This is alternative history, so it's set in the UK, in the north of the UK. I think it's set in, I can't remember if it's Yorkshire or Lancashire. I think it's Yorkshire. Or is it Lancashire? No, it's Lancashire, isn't it? Where the Pendle Witches were. Because there's a lot about the Pendle Witches in this. I think Pendle's in Lancashire. I have to look that up. But so it's quite nice because you get a lot of like the local folklore. I really liked the beginning of the first book because the spook, John Gregory, the first thing he does is he takes Tom to this haunted house and he leaves him there alone overnight, and Tom gets visited by a ghost who's kind of aggressive. He comes in and grabs him and tries to drag him away, only doesn't succeed, and then John Gregory comes back and explains to him that this ghost is pretty harmless. It's pretty scary, but it's also pretty harmless. And it was a pretty scary scene, especially as, like, you know, when you start reading this, there was no description on it or anything. You know, you've got a kind of dialogue bit here that's taken from the book at the beginning, but there's no kind of indication of what this book was actually about. So I thought it was a pretty good start. It's really scary. You don't know what to expect. So John Gregory this is Tom's first lesson. He kind of wanted to see how he would react in the face of some supernatural being. And then he shows Tom, there's like an inscription on the door of the house that he put there, and which is supposed to say that this ghost there's a ghost in there, but it's pretty harmless, and with his kind of signature on it. And I thought that was a pretty good idea to have these kind of this code that they have, these inscriptions. But then you never hear about it again in any of the books. That's it. You are kind of introduced to this system of symbols, and then that's it, pretty much. You barely ever comes up again. And also the ghosts, I don't think you ever see any ghosts again. So it starts off pretty good, but redundant information is pretty common in this series. Tom then goes to live in the spook's home where he starts his apprenticeship, and the spook's home is a pretty strange place. He has a goblin that lives there, and this goblin takes the form of like a cat, a large like orange cat, and the goblin does all the cooking and all the housework. And John Gregory has 2 gardens, one each side of his house, and one of them has witches in it. So what John Gregory does is when he captures a witch, he'll dig a hole and put the witch in the hole, and then put silver, like a silver cage, inside it so they can't escape. Pretty horrific way of dealing with witches. Because the problem they have with the witches is they can't really kill them. If they kill them, the witches can still... They're not really alive, but they're kind of like living dead. They can still come out of their graves and hurt people. And the only way of kind of killing them for good would be to eat their heart. So John Gregory's method is to stick them in the ground and just leave them there, which is pretty cruel. John Gregory also has quite a dark view of women. He doesn't like women, and he tells Tom to be wary of women, especially if they have pointy shoes, because that's what the witches wear. And then Tom goes out into the woods, and he meets a young girl his age called Alice, who wears pointy shoes. And he doesn't really know what to think of her because she seems pretty nice. She seems like a pretty nice person. She's just a kid like him, but she's also a witch. So very early on we kind of get this dilemma, because Tom is really isolated at this point. He's just the spook's apprentice, so all his days are devoted to learning how to be a spook. He doesn't have any friends, and people don't like spooks. They tend to stay away from them. So he's pretty isolated, so it's understandable that he would want to have this friend, only obviously John Gregory not very okay with that. Despite that, Tom and Alice become friends, and they have quite a nice friendship, which goes quite far in this whole series. I'll get back to that. So in the second book, I have kind of vague memories of this one, but I remember that one of the focal points in this was the Inquisition. So I don't really know what century this is supposed to be in. I'm guessing the Pendle Witch trials took place in the 16th century, so I'm guessing this is 16th or 17th century this is supposed to be. I'm going to go with 16th century. So the beginning of the Renaissance. And so in this book you have an Inquisitor. And the Inquisitors and the spooks don't really get on with each other. And the Inquisitor's a pretty cruel character. Obviously he likes to torture people. And John Gregory I think he has a rant about him, but John Gregory kind of puts witches in cages in the ground and just leaves them there to rot. So I didn't really understand why he had an issue with this guy. But yeah, the Inquisitor's there to catch the witches. And at the end, the Inquisitor is found dead in a pool. And it's later on transpired that Alice was the one responsible for this. And again, you never hear about the Inquisition again in any of these books. Like, there was the Inquisitor, he died, and you never hear about them again. Where did the Inquisition go? I don't know. So in the third book, you get to see an even darker side of John Gregory as regards to the witches, because he has another house that he goes to in the winter. So they travel to his second home, and there is a woman there that lives there, and she is a witch. And she, Tom discovers that this witch used to be John Gregory's companion, which kind of might explain why he has a dim view of women and kind of witches. Because he does explain to Tom that witches can be, evil, but they can also be benevolent. They can use their powers for good. So, either that or they're dead. And they kind of come out of the ground and eat people. Yeah. So, this witch, John Gregory kind of... they used to have a loving relationship, but then she went weird for some reason. And John Gregory's way of dealing with this is to drug her. He keeps her drugged all the time. So, he can keep her in this house on her own for half the year and just drug her so she's docile. I didn't really like John Gregory. I think that comes across pretty clearly. He's not a very good person, but he is a really good spook. He's very old school, but yeah, he's not a very nice person. So yeah, that was John Gregory's ex-girlfriend and how he dealt with her. It gets weird. This is a book series for kids, right? This is a book series for like 10, 12-year-olds, like, I don't know. So up until this point, the witches of, like, the Pendle witches have just kind of been living quietly, kind of just living their lives. There are 3 clans. I think you've got the Malkins, you've got the Deans, and you've got the Moldhills, I think the names of the clans are, if I remember right. Yeah, that's it, Dean, Malkins, and Moldhills. And they, you know, they didn't really bother anyone, but now they decide to form an alliance and try and summon the devil. It gets dark. It gets very dark. This book gets very dark. And so Tom and the Spook have to deal with that. You get to see, there's this character that I really, really loved called Grimalkin, who's like the witch's assassin. And she is incredible. And I really liked it because she starts out, like, when you're first introduced to her, I can't remember which book it is, but when we first introduced her, she's this really kind of terrifying character. And, like, whenever she's mentioned, everyone kind of trembles, and especially the Spook and Tom Ward, because she's, like, supposed to be their mortal enemy. But actually, she turns out to be an ally, a pretty strong ally, because she doesn't want the devil to be summoned, even though it's her sisters doing it. So she was very interesting. And she just looks really terrifying as well. She's got all this big, like, hair, and she's filed her teeth down to points, and she's got all these knives and scissors. She's like this insanely badass character. But she's also got this thing that I don't understand. And if someone wants to offer an explanation for this, I would love to hear it, because this has come up in other books as well. These kind of badass women characters, they don't wear trousers, they wear skirts that they kind of cut up the middle and then tie around their legs to kind of make into trousers. And that also came up in, I think it was The Last Wish by Andrzej Sapkowski, which I thought that was pretty bad. So this to me is just turned into a trope of kind of weird women characters that are supposed to be badass. Are they trying to make a statement by doing this? I don't really understand. Just why don't they just wear trousers? Just wear trousers, girl. The character who does this in Andrzej Sapkowski's Last Wish she was supposed to be Snow White. It was a retelling of Snow White, and she reminded me of the Snow White in the Once Upon a Time series, only the Snow White in the Once Upon a Time series wears trousers. What is the problem with trousers? I don't get it. In book 5, Tom spends a bit of time with a different spook than John Gregory, who was also an apprentice to John Gregory, Bill. And he goes to spend, I think, 6 months with Bill, or something like that, a few months. And Bill has a very different approach to John Gregory. He lives in swampland, so he has a very different variety of creatures there. But he also has a different approach to witches, because you have these kind of water witches that are just gross, honestly. A lot of the creatures in this are just completely gross. And his method of dealing with them is to kill them and then rip out their hearts and feed it to his dogs, because then they will stay dead forever. So I don't know, he is kind of more, he appears to be like more hardcore than John Gregory, but I actually liked him. I thought he was really good, and he's like very matter-of-factly, and he doesn't mess around, like, you know, very to the point. So Tom gets like a different experience with another spook, but at this point I was kind of thinking, they do seem horrifically, like, short of spooks, because Bill dies at the end of this book, and then, like, who's supposed to take care of his swampland and all the creatures that live there? Like, who's supposed to deal with them? So I kind of felt like they should be trying to get hold of more spooks in this world, because there's no shortage of boggarts and disgusting swamp creatures and witches. Yet there are a lot of spooks, so I don't know. This was also the point in this series where I first started getting tired of it, because originally Joseph Delaney announced that he was going to do a trilogy. Then he announced that, I think he said he was going to do 10 novels. So it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And so it's great that he has all of these ideas and all this imagination, but I was getting older at this point. I started reading this series when I was 17 or 18 years old. And I think I was just starting to get a bit kind of like, oh, really? This is how you're writing it? I started to get a bit annoyed with the writing style. At the end of every book, I remember just hoping John Gregory would die, because I just didn't like him. And I started thinking, am I gonna go on with this series? Do I want to? But I did. I got to book 6. So book 6 gets very interesting, because in this book, they actually travel to a different country. They go to Greece. And that's the thing I really appreciate about alternative history, like in the Temeraire series, where they get to go to other countries. They travel a lot and get to see how things work in different countries. So in this one, they go to Greece, so you get to see how the spooks work in Greece and what kind of, like, magical creatures there are in Greece. And you also learn a lot about Tom's mother, because there was this kind of side note that she did have some kind of powers, because when Tom was a kid, there's this moment where he's talking about, because this is all supposed to be written by Tom, like in his diaries, his account of what happened. And he talks about his mother saying that when he was a kid, he would get frightened because he would see people who had been hanged from trees, like outside their house. There was this kind of hill with trees on it, and people had been hanged there. And he could see them and hear them moaning. And he said that his mother would, like, go up onto the hill and tell them to be quiet, and then she would come back and they were quiet. So there's always been this kind of, his mother has always had this kind of weird aura to her, that she's had these kind of magical powers, but it gets big in Greece. So she is originally from Greece, and she travels with them all the way to where they have to go to fight this creature called the Ordin, I think. I read these books in French, so I don't know, maybe some of the names have been translated, which is why I'm not going to go too deep into the names of the magical creatures. But yeah, and I'm not going to tell you a lot about it, because I thought this book was really good. Like, after reading book 5 and getting to the end and being like, I don't know if I'm going to carry on with this, this one really spiked my curiosity again and kind of got me going again, which is pretty much what happened all the way through reading this series. I kind of had a love-hate relationship with it, or I'd go through a book and I'd be like, oh, do I really want to carry on with this? And then another one would come out and I thought it was really good, and then it kind of keeps going up and down. So this was definitely an up one. Book 6. In book 7, it gets weird again. So when they come back from Greece, so Tom and John Gregory and Alice is also with them. They get back from Greece and they find, like, there's a war going on and there's soldiers knocking around, and the soldiers have burnt down John Gregory's house. And I thought that was really sad, because I just loved the house so much. He had this big library and obviously the goblin, the cat. And so the soldiers burnt down his house, and the witches freed the witches that he'd buried in the garden. Because it is, I mean, Bill had the right idea about that, you know, rip out their hearts and get the dogs to eat them. sorted. But no, they were still there, these sort of terrifying, very dangerous witches, and now they're free again. So do John Gregory and Tom try and sort this out? No, they go to the Isle of Man. My memories of these two books, book 8 and book 9, are... no, what am I saying? Book 7 and book 8. They are pretty muddled because in book 7 they go to the Isle of Man, and in book 8 they go to Ireland, and I can't remember what happens in the Isle of Man and what happens in Ireland, but I remember just being very, very angry with a lot of the writing style, with a lot of the plot lines, because it just gets really weird, and this is when we start having like the redundant information and even stuff that just completely didn't make sense to me. So throughout these books you've got these creatures. There are issues, like they are the product of women sleeping with the devil, like witches sleeping with the devil, because the devil has control over all the witches, but if they wish to not be under his control anymore, they can summon him and have a child with him, and then they are out of his power, basically. And it later on turns out that Alice is the product of one of these liaisons. But usually the creatures are monsters. They have these monsters, and they usually call stuff like tusk and horn because they have all these like teeth. And like I say, I can't remember which book it's in, but they have to fight this sorcerer or something, like this very evil, powerful man. And one of the creatures who works for him is one of the devil's children. So he's this terrifying monster, but he wants this wizard to be destroyed. So he gets in contact with Tom and Gregory, and he comes to see them, and he explains at what particular time they need to go and fight this wizard, because at this point he will be less powerful. And he really tries to kind of help them to, you know, put all the balls in their court to try and bring down this wizard. And they kind of thank him, and he scuttles off. And then they do not do anything with the information he gives them. And that really annoyed me. I was like, why have this character? Why have all of this scene if you're just going to completely ignore this person's advice? Because he knows. He knows. He works for this guy. But yeah, I think that was on the Isle of Man. But then, so this poor creature ends up getting killed by the wizard. A lot of people die in this. It's really dark. Again, this is a series for young children. Well, not young children, but children, young teenagers. And it does get really, really dark. And when they go to Ireland, a bunch of other weird stuff happens. There's a scene where they get I remember there's this group of people who are trying to summon Pan, the god Pan, and they manage to capture one of them. And you've got John Gregory and you've got someone else, and someone else wants to torture this man to get information out of him. And John Gregory's like, no, we don't torture people. That's not right. And in the end, they're just like, okay, we'll just agree to disagree. And the guy, like, all the way through this kept saying, I'm never going to talk to you. You can torture me as much as you like. I won't tell you anything. And then they have this argument about torturing him or not. And at the end of the argument, the guy starts talking. He just tells them everything, like, what did I miss? What happened? What went through this guy's head? He just starts talking to them for no reason. So again, at this point, I started just, again, right back down again. Just like, no, just no, I don't want to do this series anymore. And then book 9, Grimalkin features heavily in it. So I was completely on board. So at this point, the devil's been summoned, and he is now walking the earth, and obviously Tom and John Gregory and Alice and Grimalkin have to put a stop to it. And Grimalkin actually manages to cut off his head, I think, and she's managed to, I think they dig a pit, and they managed to, like, lock his body in a pit. And then Grimalkin has to do something with the head. I cannot remember what, but they need to do this kind of special ceremony in order to kill the devil for good, or send him back to hell. And Grimalkin's really angry with the devil. Yeah, the devil. Grimalkin's really angry with the devil. And the reason she didn't want him being summoned and being brought back to Earth was that she went through the kind of ritual of having a child with him. And when the child was born, the child was like Alice. The child was completely normal and not a monster. So the devil decided to kill the child. And you don't do that with Grimalkin. That's not a good idea. So now a lot of this book she spends carrying his head around in a bag with like an apple covered in thorns stuck in his mouth so he can't talk. So I thought that was, I don't know, I thought that was pretty amusing. But yeah, Grimalkin, really like Grimalkin, big fan. And then book 10 happened and I thought, yes, great, finally, it will be the end of the series and I don't have to deal with this anymore and go through this weird up, down, love, hate, yeah. But then I got to the end and turns out it's not the end. It's not. Great. I think this is the one that happens in the town I was born. I was born in Yorkshire in Todmorden. And I think this is the one where they go to Todmorden at the beginning. I can't seem to find it. But I think this is it. So that made me happy. And so that started off well. I was really convinced John Gregory was going to die in this one, but he still managed to pull through. And I don't know why. There's a lot of scenes with him in very difficult situations where Tom kind of has to come and save him. And I didn't really understand why that was, because he's supposed to be the spook. Like, I mean, okay, he's getting on a bit, but he's supposed to be the best spook. But he just keeps ending up in these horrible situations. And I think in this one, there is a scene where he is like begging to die. Yeah, very, very, very dark scene. But yeah, I got to the end, and apparently there's still more to come. And again, I was like, oh god, I don't want to do this anymore. Then Slitter happens. And oh my god! Now in this book we have something completely different, because it's not about Tom Ward or John Gregory. It's about this character called Slitter, who is a mage, who's a cobbled mage. I'm sorry if I'm not saying that right. Like I said, I read it in French. I don't know how far the translations went. I didn't look it up. But this takes place, I don't know where it is. I think it's somewhere north. We know it's in the north. And it starts off with a farmer who dies, and he has 3 daughters. And when he dies, the mage comes to collect the daughters, and he'd made a deal with the farmer that he tried to feed on their blood when they were younger, but the farmer made a deal with him that he could sell one of the daughters. The eldest daughter was a slave, if I remember rightly, and he had to take the other 2 to live with one of their relatives. So the mage arrives, and he looks quite extraordinary, this character, Slitter. He's kind of humanoid, but he has a wolf's head, and he's very, very powerful. And I thought this book was brilliant. Like, this was overall my favourite book in the series. I thought it was really, really good. And I thought the character Slitter was really interesting, because there's a lot to unpack with this character. So he takes these 3 girls away, and they have to travel quite a long way. And they get captured, they get taken to the cobbled city. A lot of stuff happens. But interestingly, what I found most interesting about this was how Slitter's relationship with the eldest daughter develops, because at the beginning he doesn't really see them as anything else but like a way of, you know, getting some cash or whatever. And he doesn't really care about them, but as time goes on, he kind of grows to care in his own way. And it gets very interesting, and he protects them and looks after them. And I felt like it was more than just his, like, debt towards the farmer. Malkin makes an appearance in this book as well. Quite an incredible appearance. She takes on, when the girls get captured in the Cobbled City, Grimalkin takes on the appearance of the eldest girl, whose name is Nessa, I seem to believe. Can't remember. It's been a while, like I said. But she, like, completely plays Slitter, and like the endings. I thought this book was extraordinary. I thought it was way better than all the others. I really enjoyed it. And there is this kind of poem at the end that Slitter is writing to Nessa. And it's so interesting because this character isn't human. And so we're having, like, a character who isn't human trying to kind of function on a human level and understand humanity, even though he doesn't. And there's this, like, incredible poem at the end where he's talking to her, and it's almost like a love poem. Only at the end, this is obviously his going on in his imagination, but in the end he eats her. And it felt to me like that was kind of his way of expressing his love for Nessa. I kind of read it that way. It was quite an extraordinary ending to an extraordinary story. So yes, by far the best one. And the Cobbled City is also interesting because their aim is to kind of expand it until it covers the whole earth, or all of the earth. So this city keeps expanding, and as it expands, it gets more and more powerful, and they are enslaving all the humans they come across along the way. And this is a very real threat. And like I say, Grimalkin was there, so she got to see this firsthand. She was there looking for a weapon to destroy the devil. They're still trying to destroy the devil at this point. But yes, the story of Slitter was really, really interesting. So after the disaster that was book 10, I was back on board once again. Now, aside from Grimalkin, the other character I really, really loved was Alice. And she was really the reason why I kept going with this series. Because I really didn't care about John Gregory. I didn't care much about Tom Ward. But I thought, I mean, Tom Ward to me was like Arthur in Kevin Crossley Holland's Arthur series. That's what I kind of felt when reading about him. It really felt like reading Arthur, this kind of character that has very kind of strong convictions. Only I thought he was less interesting. He was kind of a less interesting Arthur for me. But Alice, I really liked Alice, and I wanted, like I said, the reason I kept going back to this series was because I wanted to see what was going to happen to her. And in the 12th book, a lot of stuff happens, and she really becomes a focal point because now we know that she is one of the devil's children, and she has to, they're still trying to find a way to destroy the devil, and her powers are very important in this scenario, so she really becomes the focal point. And she got her own book, which I thought was lovely. And she becomes terrifying. She really does. She turns into this incredibly powerful witch, and the irony of it is that she is one of the devil's children, but she's the one who's going to ultimately destroy him. So I like the irony in that. But she does become absolutely terrifying. There's a scene at the end where Tom's in a very bad position, and Alice starts like ripping up the earth to engulf all the people who are trying to hurt Tom. And I think she just keeps repeating this mantra, almost like a little girl saying, "You shouldn't hurt Tom, you shouldn't hurt Tom." And she just turns into this completely terrifying witch, I was such a fan of that. I love that. Which brings us to the last book I read in this series, which is number 13 at this point. It's been a long haul. So in this book, I don't have a lot of memories of it, but I remember there's a big battle at the end, and John Gregory finally dies. And I thought he had a pretty dismal death, because, like, even though I kind of never liked this character, I thought he was gonna have a more kind of significant death, but he doesn't. There's just a battle going on, and at one point Tom turns around and, oh, John Gregory's dead. Right, that's it. And also, I was disappointed with that. I was very disappointed with the ending, because all the way through the books, it's kind of hinted that Tom and Alice are gonna get together, because they're kind of like opposing forces. He's a spook, she's a witch, but they're very, very close. And it's clear that Alice has a lot of feelings for Tom, and he has a lot of feelings for her. And at the end of this book, it gets really weird, because she has to summon a sorcerer or something, or Grimalkin summons a sorcerer, and Alice just instantly falls in love with him and then runs off with him. Tom gets to have a conversation with her, and she's just like, yeah, you wouldn't understand. And then she tells him about the Kobold City that's expanding, and like, that's the bigger threat. Like, don't worry about me, because you've got bigger things to deal with. And so Alice, who'd been this like really strong character all the way through this series, has now turned into a complete bitch. Like, I just lost all my respect for her, just like that. Like, seriously, girl, that's what you're like now. You are talking down at Tom and being a complete, you know, why? Just why? What happened? What happened to Alice? So I think of all the endings, like the weird stuff that's been going on in this series, the inconsistencies, the weird plot lines, the redundant information, this was the thing that kind of bugged me the most. I said before how much I hate the love at first sight thing. This is like love at first sight to the extreme, at like the worst possible case scenario that makes absolutely no sense. And there's Alice just suddenly turned into this weird, bitchy know-it-all. Ugh. So I haven't read book 14 yet, but I'm guessing this is where the war with the kobolds really gets underway. I would like to see Slitter again. I really would. I'm not planning on reading this book right now, but I mean, I still have it. Like, I haven't decided to get rid of it or anything. So I don't know. I don't know when I'll be picking up this series again, or even if I will. Maybe I won't, because I mean, I've had it's been a very emotional run these past, how long has it been, 13, 14 years I've been going along with this series, and I do kind of feel that I've got, I mean, maybe I'm just too old now, maybe I'm just too old for this kind of thing, I don't know, but I do really want to hand it to Joseph Delaney, because it is really hard to keep a series this long going with like not too many inconsistencies, incoherences, I don't know, but yeah, it is a lot of work. So, and overall I do think it's a pretty good series for young teenagers, and if it can get kids reading, then great. But maybe that's it, maybe I'm just too old for it, I don't know. But there are kind of two other books that go along with this series. Like, you've got The Witches. This is a collection of short stories about some of the witches in the series. So you've got a story about Grimalkin, where you get to hear like how she became the witch's assassin and what she had to go through to get to where she is. So I appreciated that. There's also a story about Alice before she met Tom Ward, what it was like for her previous life. So that was interesting. So yeah, I did appreciate this kind of collection of short stories about the witches, and also the bestiary, which I think is pretty good. It's got these lovely, really good illustrations in it, and it tells the story of like all, well, not the story, but it kind of explains what all the creatures are. It's a bestiary. I thought it was a bit short, to be honest. I was quite surprised at how short this is, because this features quite a lot in the series. Like, John Gregory's always got his bestiary with him, and he's always writing new things in it, and then Tom Ward's supposed to do that as well. So I thought it would be longer. I don't know, but yeah, but there's some pretty cool stuff in here. You've got the goblin, the cat that lives in the John Gregory's house. So that, then you've got like the story of how he got the goblin to come and work with him, which is pretty nice. There's also, oh, there's a picture of Grimalkin. There she is, looking absolutely awesome. And also the mages. Where is he? Where's Slitter? So this is what Slitter's supposed to look like. The kind of humanoid wolf creature. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the bestiary, even though I thought it could have been longer. Yeah. So if you like kind of fantasy based on folklore, bear in mind that this is a book series for young teenagers, but it's still a pretty cool series. So that was it. I finally did it. That was my video on Joseph Delaney's Wardstone Chronicles, or aka the Spook series. And that's it from me for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Do like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all soon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.